Welcome back here on Power Lunch, and we're going straight across to Niranjan Hiranandani, Chairman and Managing Director at the Hiranandani Group. So thank you very much for joining us today on NDTV Profit. This is Manvi here in the Delhi studio. I'm going to get right to it. You know, among real estate developers, everyone with a stake in the sector, what is the response to the fact that the bill has made it through the Raj Sabha and is likely to have a fairly easy journey in the Lok Sabha as well? What is the sentiment? How would you describe it?
I think it's very exciting to see that we are moving to the next level of transparency. I think the country wanted the transparency. The consumer definitely found that the transparency in the industry was not adequate enough for their satisfaction. Also, the fact that there were various issues which were not getting answered in terms of questions that were being asked about the projects, I think that will come to an end with the regulatory bill. So I think the biggest contribution for the purposes of this bill has been the transparency which will come to the end consumer to have full knowledge of the product. I think that's a very positive sign of this regulatory bill.
Mr. Hiranandani, for those of our viewers who are watching, who probably have a home in the pipeline, some of whom are perhaps, have been waiting for a few years to take delivery, just run us through exactly how life could change for, home buyers with this bill.
See, earlier, many of the information which was there relating to the approval of plans or the documents which were available relating to the properties, etc., were not actually provided to the end consumer. So he was actually working on a blind. He didn't know exactly what he was getting into. Now all that will be made available by the regulator on the website, and various information will be available to each and every one, so that there is nothing behind the back of the consumer when he goes to buy the apartment, when he tries to continue the deal, and he knows exactly what is the extent to which permission is already there. So I think this is a positive sign wherein today a consumer will go into a product with an open eye and no information will be withheld. So that's the positive part of it. However, today the bill excludes having the regulator able to control the government machinery. So the local authorities which give the sanction of the plans, the state government which could be giving permissions including environmental clearance, are not under the control of the regulator, which is an important item which needs to be controlled, because in many cases the delays which have taken place today, for example, permissions in the Mumbai region used to take 2 to 3 years in place of time earlier 2 to 3 months. Now, of course, Mr. Fadnavis has committed under the Ease to Doing Business and under the Right to Services Act in Maharashtra that such permission will be given in 60 days. So a combination of these factors hopefully will work well for the end consumer, but we have to see how this will walk the talk.
Okay. Now let me just look at this from a point of view of a developer in the real estate space, and some of the provisions in the bill are pretty strict, and at a very broad level one could argue that this could squeeze could be a period of capital squeeze for developers, given that the conditions about depositing a minimum of 70% collections from buyers in an escrow account to cover the cost of the construction and the land. This is not how developers have been used to working. This is not how their financial engineering has been done so far. So in real terms, could this have an impact?
Oh, it will have a huge impact as far as the developers are concerned in terms of the financial requirements of the companies, and especially those companies which are already overstressed are definitely going through a worse period, because the banks and financial institutions will not be able to lend them more because they are already overstretched. But normally, I think what is going to happen is developers will take less number of projects at a time. because they will not overdo themselves in terms of the number of projects that they are doing at the same time, and hence there will be much less product by each of the developers at the first instance. And I think, but that is a positive sign as far as the consumers are concerned, because the money will go into an escrow account. But you're right, I think you're going to see a lot of rationalization and consolidation in the real estate business, because many of the owners will not be able to fund the projects, the developers will not be able to fund the projects, so they will probably have to go to some third party in order to rationalize the projects, as well as probably give it away to some other people to complete the projects.
You know, and that's exactly the point, isn't it? For those who are already in a bit of a tight spot, I mean the developers, and because I understand that even those projects which haven't got completion certificate are going to have to comply with these provisions. So let's take a scenario where you have a developer, you know, who hasn't got a completion certificate, now has to comply with the new stricter norms and is already financially stressed. I'm wondering how that scenario is going to play out, because any confusion or delays on that front will also ultimately hurt the home buyers in that particular project.
You are absolutely correct that the interregnum period between now and where the new projects start is going to be a very difficult period, because nobody is clear as to how they are going to handle it. For instance, if I've already sold half the building or 3/4 of the building and part construction has already been done, how are you going to fit within the new norms? Because the old customers are under the old norms and now have to come under the new norms. Those monies have already been used, or whatever it is has been done in the old system. How much of the fresh monies that come in, or is it going to be escrowing of the balance amount of money which is going to come with the balanced number of projects which are there? And also what's going to happen in the interregnum period by the time now and the registration of the project and getting the approval from the regulator, which of course is still not appointed. In any case, it has to pass the Lok Sabha, then finally the law comes, then it will be adapted by the states, then the states have to bring it into force after bringing a regulator, and has to create adequate machinery for the purposes of approving these projects and carrying them out. So it's a humongous task when you're bringing the entire country under the regulations. I mean, it's much more extensive than what was under the Urban Land Ceiling Act. So the number of people required for the purposes of doing regulatory work is going to be much bigger and larger than it was under the Urban Land Ceiling.
Mr. Hiranandani, none of us can predict the timelines on the government side, you know, how much time it will take to make it through the Lok Sabha, how much time it will take to set up the regulator and then percolate down to the state level. Let's just, for purposes of our conversation today, say that this is a year away. But it still requires immediate thinking and action by developers to start gearing up for that situation. I'm just trying to understand right now, given the pretty, tough lay of the land in terms of, credit availability, so much scrutiny happening of the profile of lenders, all of that, given the current environment, what is your peer group sort of thinking and strategizing? How is their preparedness shaping up in a sense?
I think everybody was quite expecting it, because it's been on the anvil for quite some time. I think people know what it is, and that this is coming close to reality. I think that's known to one and all. So a lot of people knew this is going to happen. But you have to remember that the credit situation and the markets are pretty bad in certain sectors in India. And those sectors are going to be much more badly hurt. So obviously, not everybody is going to be able to take it well, except the consumer. But ultimately, if the certain developers are hurt more, the consumers under their development are also going to be affected negatively. So I think some hand-holding needs to be done by the government for projects which are already online and need completion.
Indeed, but it could separate, the reliable from the sort of, overnight sort of stories that have emerged in many markets of India, right?
Of course. I mean, those which are already stressed are going to really find it difficult because they will not be able to use the monies out of their fresh products for the areas which are already stressed under the old schemes. So I think that's a predictable nightmare which may occur in certain cases of certain developers and projects. Yes, could be possible because you won't be able to fund, let's say a project is already stressed and you're getting money from the new projects. You can't divert the new project monies into the old projects. So obviously that's a stressful situation because the expectation would have been that any surpluses immediately generated by the new project would be helpful in completing the old projects which are stressed. So yes, the answer is yes. They would have to then look at other avenues of getting incomes and other things, or would have to sell projects.
Indeed. Niranjan Hiranandani, Chairman and Managing Director of the Hiranandani Group, appreciate your insights here on NDTV Profit. Good talking to you today, a day after the real estate bill was passed by the Rajya Sabha. Of course, the Lok Sabha journey is still to start. Thank you. After the break.